Alex, I need you to sit up and drink this for me, okay? Or you're gonna need my help. Right, come here. Sit up.
Are you okay?
I'm not the one with the busted lip. Yeah, I'm fine. I'll tell you what happened later, but are you okay?
Oh, yeah. It's been interesting.
You should leave now before you make everything worse.
Here, pack your things. Load up the jet and contact the airstrip. Right away, sir. Make sure the house is stocked and ready for guests.
Where are we going?
Someplace no one will ever find you.
General Hospital remains in 5th place in my soap opera rankings. General Hospital still has a plethora of problems, but the fact remains that it is the most watchable US soap opera. Somehow, some way, the writing is still weak, the pacing is still absolutely terrible, and Frank should have been fired long ago. But here we are. There's enough going on to keep things interesting, and I think that is kind of what they tried to do on this show. They will just keep adding new stories without ever actually wrapping up past stories. They leave a lot of loose ends in their stories so they could add more characters and more stories. But yeah, I mean, I still thought November was watchable. That's the word I'm going to describe General Hospital for the month of November. It was indeed watchable. We'll talk about some of the stories here. I think we're going to start with the whole Esme and Nick situation where he's been holding her captive thinking she is the Hook killer. There's also been people finally figuring out that there could be a connection to Trina with all these attacks and the murders, because they seem to be attacking, the Hook killers attacking people that were involved with Trina's trial and whatnot. But there was a point where Esme escapes from Nicholas, and she runs into Elizabeth on the pier, ends up shoving Elizabeth, who hits her head. Nick tracks Esme down, though, and this kind of brings Elizabeth into the story, which I think is a good thing. Elizabeth is finally getting more screen time, which is what the fans have been wanting for years now, it seems like, with Elizabeth, and Frank just won't give it, because that's another thing that's been General Hospital's biggest problem these past few years, if not longer, is they don't give the fans what they want. They, in fact, try to do the opposite sometimes, and that's just dumb. I mean, the ratings for General Hospital this year as a whole have been bad. Like, they've gone up in November sweeps, finally, for like the first time all year, but since the beginning of the year, it's been a rough year for General Hospital ratings, and with Days of Our Lives now on Peacock and no longer on broadcast television, it's like General Hospital is kind of the new show that might teeter around 2 million viewers, and eventually, if they continue on not giving fans what they want, they could be teetering under 2 million, which is what got Ron fired from this show when he was writing for it. Maybe it will finally get Frank fired, but I've given up on that at this point. I think we're stuck with Frank until this show's off the air, probably. But I do like Elizabeth kind of being brought into this Nick story. Elizabeth should have always been in this story because Cam made a sex tape of her son with Joss. And yeah, I do like Elizabeth kind of knowing what Nick is up to, helping Nick. Esme's been having stomach pain. She's pregnant with Nick's baby. Elizabeth is learning all of this and being involved with it. This comes after her pretty terrible story, though, with her parents. And they make Jeff Weber a terrible person. General Hospital has a history of doing this now, of making classic characters from the 70s and 80s and ruin their characters. They take those characters and ruin them, and they kind of did that to Jeff Weber here. I mean, I guess you could say he was a clean slate for decades because he hasn't been on the show in decades, but if this wasn't a trend for the show, maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal. But in my opinion, they hurt the history of Jeff Weber, a classic character on the show. So I didn't like that story with his parents and Finn and his ex and Finn and Elizabeth's relationship. I've talked about it enough over the past year and how it sucks and how the story's been all about Finn it should be more about Elizabeth. And it's not like this story with Elizabeth, Nick, and Esme is about Elizabeth, but I still think it's a good change of pace for the character. We'll move on to Anna and Heather escaping from police. Dex was the driver. Heather gets out and just goes to get a BLT at Kelly's and runs into Cam. I enjoyed those scenes. We also eventually have Heather and Ryan together. Someone on Twitter pointed out, though, this is some of the ridiculousness of General Hospital's writing, is that Ryan and Heather are these really past terrible villains, and they could just be at the mental hospital, but then Spencer is doing time in one of the worst prisons for, like, not even a big crime. I think there is some inconsistency there with the way the show writes, because obviously they write these cartoon villains to never do any time in prison or really ever pay for anything, which is not just General Hospital. That's an American soap opera problem in general. But this is a good example of that, where Spencer's praying for a small crime, but these big bad villains who've done terrible things, they don't have to be in the worst prison. Oh no. But anyway, the Dex story, Dex gets shot while he's trying to help Anna and Heather escape. And that leads to Joss taking care of Dex. And we're getting this possible affair story between Joss and Dex. And I don't know. I kind of see both sides, where there's one side saying, oh, well, she has more chemistry with Dex, so that can work. Sure, maybe. And I see the other side that are saying that this is just the show once again trying to write Joss like her mother Carly when they should be two separate characters. I see that too. For me, the affair story is just what General Hospital's been for years now under Frank. It's mediocre at best. It's a mediocre story at best, and that's because the writing for it isn't good. We're getting an affair story from Joss, and it's like 100% from Joss's point of view. And this is a similar thing they like to do with Carly and her stories, and that's why so many of the fan base now hates Carly. And for good reason, because they shove Carly down our throat. And I could understand the comparisons to that with Joss, because they're shoving her into this story, but we get no point of view from Cam, who she's cheating on in this relationship. And the writing there will be very interesting for how they write Cam, because Cam should have anger at this entire situation. If they write Cam to just let Joss get away with this, then they're continuing to write Joss like her mother, and it's going to continue to make the fans hate Joss, like a big portion of them now hate Carly. That's just what bad writing does, and I'm already seeing that with this story. It's also on the rushed side. I mean, compare it to the rest of the stories on this show, which go by so slow. This one is pretty rushed in comparison, I would say, and it's just making Joss look worse. So I think the writing for this story is just going to continue to make Joss look terrible, and I don't know if that's good for the character. We had Trina finally visit Spencer in prison. They had some great scenes, but this is just, I mean, such a huge following for a soap opera couple like Spencer and Trina doesn't happen anymore. They're getting a plane fly over the studio for them. Like, this is a very popular couple, and I think General Hospital has handled it poorly all year still. Like, they keep these two apart too much. I get how they're trying to stretch it out, but the way they're doing it now is getting so old. And coming into the new year, I'm going to just have to drop General Hospital again in my rankings again, I guess, if this story doesn't move. Move Spencer and Trina along, because you're going to have, once again, the rhetoric that Frank is afraid of interracial couples in 2022 because of the way he writes for them, or the lack of writing for them. And there's going to be good reason to say that again. I was preaching this at the beginning of this year, and it probably needs to be preached again at the beginning of 2023, because I think Frank made some changes when he was getting a lot of pushback. He at first was trying to have the press come forward for him to defend him and defend General Hospital for being a good show. If you remember that at the beginning of this year, I made some videos on that. But I feel like once that went away, he became comfortable again. And once again, I feel like this show in general is kind of being eaten alive by his pets again, like Dex, I would say, is one of his pets. Cody, Willow, like Britt, all these characters that don't really move the needle if you look at the ratings. You know, he could push his pets like Finn front and center, but the ratings in 2022 were a failure for General Hospital all around. I think if he would actually move Spencer and Shane in the right direction, it would just be good for the show overall. But alas, here we are. Britt's dying, basically, and Cody wants a necklace, and both of those stories do nothing for me. Sorry for Britt fans out there, I don't really care. But the stuff that actually kept General Hospital at 5th place in my rankings was the fact that Holly, has been back, and she's having this story with Robert, and even Laura's involved, and Felicia. Like, we're getting the classic 80s General Hospital characters all in a story. Not the best written story, but it is what it is. Holly's just trying to save Ethan, her son, from Victor, and that's why she put on an Anna mask and framed Anna for Victor. And Victor's had all these plans for years. That's another story now that's been moving so slow. All year, Victor's been planning. We still don't know what his big plan is, but he's been planning. That's just how this show tries to keep your interest. Their stories tread water and barely go anywhere, so they have to just try and add new stories to keep your interest. And we're seeing that the Hook story has disappeared basically for now until they decide to bring that back, unless they continue to try and make Esme look like the killer, and that's why the Hook story has disappeared for now. I don't know. That part of this show is grating, like the way they pace the show and the way they just add new stories without wrapping up any stories. It gets old. And yet, 5 shows below General Hospital have worse writing somehow right now, and that's why General Hospital is in 5th place. I would love to put General Hospital lower because honestly, I don't think it deserves to be in the top 5 of my rankings. But it is more watchable than the soaps in my bottom 5. And it's that shows how sad right now the state of soap operas kind of is.